"There's no hope left," whispered the girl, her body trembling not just from the cold, but from hunger. Aya, the elderly widow from Yakutia, felt her village's despair freeze to the soul as the snow fell incessantly, burying their future. With the young hunters exhausted and defeated, the sight of the 7 steppe buffaloes, each a 5,000-kilogram mountain of pure fury and meat, was their last and most perilous promise. Wrapped in old furs, with her husband's spirit by her side, she took up her rusted spear and set out alone into the heart of the blizzard in search of the impossible. And what she faced there defied death itself. Aya took the first step, the soft snow swallowing her fur boots. The wind howled, an icy lament that seemed to tear at her very soul. The 71-degree sea temperature was a constant assault, each breath burning her lungs. She huddled deeper into her worn furs, her husband's spear, heavy and cold, an extension of her own will. It wasn't brute strength that propelled her, but the memory of the children's hungry eyes, the heavy silence of the village, the despair clinging to every thread of hope. Her heart beat a slow, determined rhythm, an ancestral drum against the deadly silence of the icy wilderness. Her husband, Boris, would have laughed at her audacity. An old widow against a mountain of meat, he would say, but his eyes would have shone with pride. Aya felt his presence, a phantom warmth beside her guiding her steps. He had taught her to read the snow, to feel the wind's direction, to understand the whispers of the frozen earth. She didn't look for obvious tracks, for the blizzard erased them as quickly as they formed. Instead, she sought subtle ruptures in the snow's pattern, the way the wind bent around an elevation, an almost imperceptible scent of disturbed earth or trampled moss that Boris's hunter's memory had etched into her soul. Hours dragged on, each an eternity of cold and effort. Her muscles screamed. Exhaustion threatened to paralyze her, but the image of the girl trembling with hunger was a whip in her mind. Suddenly a tremor. Not a tremor from the cold, but from the earth beneath her feet. A deep, grave sound, like the thunder of a sleeping god. She crouched, her body huddled behind a snowdrift, her heart pounding in her chest. There, at a considerable distance, a colossal shadow moved through the blizzard. It wasn't a shadow, but a mountain of dark fur, with horns that looked like twisted branches of an ancient tree. One of the steppe buffaloes. Alone. Aya felt a shiver that wasn't from cold. It was even larger than the legends told, its aura of primordial fury palpable even from a distance. Its eyes, though she couldn't see them, she knew carried the savagery of 1,000 winters. The other 6 were nearby. She could feel the collective vibration, the latent threat. Ancestral wisdom whispered in her mind. Do not confront brute force with brute force, Aya. Use the ice, use the wind, use your mind. She began to move, not towards the buffalo, but in a wide arc, seeking higher ground, a crevice in the rocks, anything that could serve as a natural trap. Her movements were slow, calculated, each step a study of the landscape, each breath a silent prayer. She watched the buffalo, a dark spot in the white vastness, noting how it moved, how it sniffed the air, how it scraped the snow in search of food. It was a creature of pure instinct, and Aya knew her only chance was to anticipate and manipulate those instincts. She needed to lead it where it didn't want to go, without it realizing it was being guided. The spear in her hands was not just a weapon, but a symbol of her determination. A bridge between her people's past and future. The village's hope depended on her cunning, her patience, and the deep wisdom that age had etched into every fiber of her being. Asya moved with the calculated slowness of an ancient predator, her steps almost inaudible in the soft snow. The wind, her eternal companion and adversary, swept across the landscape. But she used it to her advantage, always keeping herself against it so her scent wouldn't reach the buffalo. Her eyes, Accustomed to the white vastness, scanned the horizon for the crevice, the depression, the rock that Boris had taught her to see not as an obstacle, but as an ally. His memory was a warm thread in her icy chest, a soft voice whispering forgotten strategies. "The earth speaks, Aya. You just need to listen." She found what she was looking for, a narrow gorge between two rocky elevations, almost invisible under the accumulated snow. It wasn't a perfect trap, but a natural funnel, a place where the colossal beast would have limited movement, where its brute force would be less effective. The challenge now was to lead it there. The buffalo, a solitary giant, continued to scrape the snow with its enormous hooves, searching for moss or lichen, oblivious to the small figure watching it. Its primordial fury was dormant, but Aya knew that one false step could awaken it. She began to create an invisible path, a trail of suggestions. She threw small stones in a direction opposite to the gorge, creating a subtle sound that the buffalo ignored. Then, with the tip of her spear, she scraped the snow at a strategic point, releasing the scent of a subterranean plant she knew was attractive to herbivores. The capricious wind carried the aroma in the desired direction. The buffalo raised its head, its nostrils flaring, sniffing the icy air. A low grunt escaped its throat, and its eyes, now visible as dark, deep points, swept the landscape. Aya crouched, almost merging with the snow, feeling the weight of that gaze. Time stretched, each minute an eternity of tension. The buffalo took a hesitant step, then another in the direction of the scent. It wasn't a rush, but a slow, ponderous advance, the beast testing the ground, suspicious. Aya felt a small relief, but fatigue began to weigh heavily on her bones. Her knees ached, the cold seemed to penetrate her furs to the marrow. She remembered the girl, her pale face and chapped lips, and a new wave of determination propelled her. She could not fail. The village depended on her. The buffalo continued its path, attracted by the scent, but also by curiosity. It was a force of nature, and Aya, a small woman, was trying to bend it to her will. She moved in a semicircle, always keeping a safe distance, always attentive to any change in the beast's behavior. Her movements were like those of a dancer, a silent and deadly ballet in the white vastness. She knew she was playing with fire, that at any moment the buffalo could sense her presence, turn, and attack her with overwhelming fury. As the buffalo approached the gorge, Aya noticed a different glint in its eyes. It wasn't just hunger, but a wild intelligence, a keen perception of its surroundings. It seemed to hesitate, sniffing the air more intensely, as if it sensed that something wasn't right. Aya's heart tightened. It was growing suspicious. She needed to act. With a quick and almost imperceptible movement, she threw a small stone at one of the gorge walls, creating a subtle echo that the buffalo interpreted as a sound coming from behind. The beast, with a low, furious roar, quickened its pace, entering the narrow passage to avoid what it thought was a threat from the rear. Aya watched. Her breath caught in her throat as the mountain of flesh wedged itself between the rocks. It was cornered, at least for a moment. But the battle, the true battle, was just beginning. The buffalo, now squeezed between the icy rocks, let out a bellow that reverberated through the gorge, a sound of primordial fury that made the ground tremble beneath Aya's feet. Its eyes, once mere dark points, now burned with a wild intensity, fixed on the small figure that had tricked it. It tried to turn, but the space was insufficient for its colossal mass. Its hooves scraped the ice, raising a cloud of snow and rock fragments. Aya felt fear freeze her insides, but the image of the hungry girl in her mind was a shield against panic. "Now, Boris," she whispered, tightening her grip on the spear. She didn't attack immediately. Instead, she began to move, a slow, calculated ballet. The spear was not for a direct frontal blow, but to guide, to irritate, to tire. She approached and retreated, using the gorge walls as protection, always keeping the beast in her field of vision. The buffalo charged, its massive horns scraping the rocks, but Aya was agile, narrowly dodging, the wind of its movement brushing against her furs. Each charge was an expenditure of energy for the animal, and each dodge was a test of Aya's endurance. Her lungs burned, icy sweat trickled down her forehead, but she didn't stop. "Patience, Aya." Boris's voice seemed to echo in her mind. "Brute force tires, the mind persists." She observed the buffalo's patterns, the way it tilted its head before charging, the slowness in its turn. It was powerful, but predictable in its blind fury. She needed a weak point, a moment of vulnerability. The other 6 buffaloes she knew were nearby, perhaps attracted by the sound of the battle. Time was her enemy as much as the cold and exhaustion. With a hoarse cry, the buffalo charged again, slower this time. Aya waited, her eyes fixed. At the last instant, she threw herself to the side, and the spear, in a fluid and precise movement, did not hit flesh, but the slippery ice beneath one of the beast's front hooves. The buffalo slipped, its hind leg lost balance, and for a brief second its enormous side was exposed. It was the moment. With all the strength she had left, Aya thrust the spear. It was not a blow of brute force, but of age-old precision. The sharp stone tip found the exact spot Boris had taught her, the junction between the rib and the shoulder, where the hide was thinnest and vital organs were close. A cry that was not of pain, but of surprise and fury, escaped the buffalo's throat. It staggered, balance lost, and a tremor ran through its colossal body. Aya pulled the spear back, the shaft vibrating in her numb hands. The buffalo tried to recover, but its movements were uncoordinated. It roared again, a sound that now carried a tone of despair. Its eyes, once full of fury, began to cloud. It took a few more stumbling steps, shaking its heavy head from side to side. Aya watched it, her heart pounding, her breath ragged. She knew the blow had been fatal, but the death of such a majestic creature was a slow and painful spectacle. Finally, with a deep groan that echoed through the icy wilderness, the buffalo collapsed. The earth trembled with the impact of its 5,000 kilo, and a cloud of snow rose. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the howling wind and Aya's ragged breathing. She remained motionless for a long moment, the spear still in her hands, watching the mountain of flesh that now lay inert. The primordial fury was gone, replaced by a solemn stillness. Exhaustion hit her like an avalanche. Her knees buckled, and she fell into the snow, her body trembling uncontrollably. It wasn't just the cold, but the relief, the adrenaline that now abandoned her. Warm tears streamed down her wind-chapped face, mixing with sweat and ice. She had succeeded. She had brought down the beast. But the journey was far from over. She looked at the buffalo, a colossal promise of life for her village. The challenge now was to drag that mountain of meat back across the icy wilderness before the other buffaloes or the night's predators arrived. Boris's spear, still in her hand, felt heavier than ever, a silent testament to her victory and the burden that still lay ahead. Aya, her body exhausted, felt the weight of the spear multiply in her numb hands. The mountain of meat before her was salvation, but also a new and colossal challenge. How to move 5,000 kilo back to the village, alone, across a 71 degrees icy wilderness. The thought overwhelmed her, almost crushing her as the buffalo had been crushed by the final impact. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath of the icy air, trying to calm her still pounding heart. The strong scent of blood and wet earth hung in the air, an invitation for the night's predators that would soon emerge. The other 6 buffaloes, she knew, would not be far. Ancestral wisdom, that which Boris so valued, whispered in her mind. You cannot carry a mountain all at once, Aya, but you can move it in pieces. She opened her eyes, gazing at the beast, The first step would be to protect it. With a monumental effort, Aya stood up, every muscle protesting. The spear now was a tool for a new kind of battle. She began to scrape the snow around the buffalo, creating a small ditch, a rudimentary barrier against the wind and the curious. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Her fingers, already hardened by the cold, worked with a silent urgency. As she worked, the image of the village girl, with her hungry eyes, returned. And not just her, but the faces of everyone. The disheartened young hunters, the worried mothers, the elders with hope, almost exhausted. Aya felt a warmth, not from the sun that stubbornly refused to appear, but from the responsibility she carried. It wasn't just meat she would bring back. It was faith, proof that the resilience of her people was stronger than the cruelest winter. It was Boris's voice, again, encouraging her. They need you, Aya, more than any hunt. The task of dismembering the buffalo was Herculean. The meat was frozen, hard as stone, and her tools were simple, the spear and a small obsidian knife she carried at her waist. Each cut was a test of her strength and patience. She knew she couldn't carry everything, but she prioritized the most nutritious parts, the internal organs, and the tenderest cuts, which would be easier to prepare and consume in the village. The work was slow, painful, and the cold threatened to numb her limbs. She stopped occasionally to rub her hands and feet, trying to maintain circulation, while her eyes scanned the horizon for any sign of movement. The sun began to set, painting the sky in pale shades of purple and grey. The temperature dropped even further, and the wind's howl intensified, bringing with it the promise of an even harsher night. Aya knew she couldn't spend the night there, alone with the carcass. It was an open invitation for wolves and bears. She needed help. But how? The village was far, and she had no way to signal. It was then that her eyes fell on the buffalo's thick hides. An idea, born of necessity and generations of wisdom, began to form in her mind. She could use the hides, not just to protect the meat, but to create something that could drag a significant portion. And perhaps, just perhaps, she could use what remained of the carcass as a decoy to distract predators while she moved away with the most vital part of the hunt. It was a risk, but the village's hunger was a greater risk. With renewed vigor, Aya began to work on the hides, using the knife to carefully separate them from the meat. It was delicate work, requiring precision not to damage them. With each piece of hide that came loose, she felt a small victory. Her fingers were numb, but the vision of the village, now more vivid than ever, propelled her. She imagined the girl's face lighting up, the smile of relief on her people's lips. This was the true strength that moved her, more powerful than the cold, stronger than exhaustion. Boris's spear, now carefully put away, had fulfilled its purpose. Now, it was her mind's and her hands' turn to continue the promise of life. The journey back would be as arduous as the hunt, but Aya knew she wasn't alone. The spirit of her people accompanied her with every step, every cut, every drop of frozen sweat that streamed down her face. Aya, with numb fingers, continued to work on the buffalo hides. Each cut of the obsidian knife a battle against the rigidity of the ice and the exhaustion that enveloped her. The hide, thick and heavy, slowly detached, revealing the dark red meat that meant life. She needed patience and precision, as Boris had always taught. Every tool has its purpose, Aya, and every purpose demands respect. She felt the cold penetrate her fur gloves, but urgency propelled her. The sun had already completely disappeared, and the darkness of the Yakutian night, dense and menacing, began to envelop the landscape. The vision of the village, now more vivid than ever, was her beacon. She imagined the girl's face lighting up, the smiles of relief on her people's lips. It wasn't just meat she would bring back. It was faith, proof that the resilience of her people was stronger than the cruelest winter. This was the true strength that moved her, more powerful than the cold, stronger than exhaustion. Boris's spear, now carefully put away, had fulfilled its purpose. Now, it was her mind's and her hands' turn to continue the promise of life. With a sigh that turned into vapor in the icy air, Aya finally managed to separate a large portion of the hide. It was a considerable piece, which she spread on the snow, forming a kind of improvised sled. Then she began to select the most vital cuts of meat, those that would bring the most sustenance and warmth to the village. The internal organs, rich in nutrients, and the tenderest pieces of the thigh would be the first to be carried. Each piece was heavy, but she arranged them carefully on the hide, as if she were packing a treasure. As she worked, the distant howl of a wolf cut through the silence, an icy reminder of the imminent threat. Predators were approaching, attracted by the scent of fresh blood. Aya's heart tightened, but she didn't let herself be disheartened. The idea of the decoy was risky but necessary. She would leave a part of the carcass, the heaviest and least practical for immediate transport, as an offering to the spirits of nature and a distraction for wild animals. It was a difficult decision, for every gram of meat was precious, but the safety of her journey back was even more so. With the essential parts of the meat firmly tied in the hide, Aya created sturdy straps with leather thongs she had brought with her. She passed them over her shoulders, feeling the colossal weight of the burden she now carried. Her muscles screamed, but she forced herself to stand. The improvised sled, though heavy, slid better on the snow than she expected. It was an advance, a small miracle amidst the icy immensity. She took one last look at the remaining carcass, a dark and imposing silhouette in the growing darkness. A silent prayer escaped her lips, asking forgiveness from the buffalo's spirit and protection from the spirits of the earth. Then she turned her back and began to drag her precious cargo. Each step was a monumental effort, her feet sinking into the snow, the cold biting at her cheeks and fingers. The wind howled, seeming to mock her slowness, but Aya didn't stop. The journey back would be as arduous as the hunt, but she knew she wasn't alone. The spirit of her people accompanied her with every step, every drop of frozen sweat that streamed down her face. And the promise of life for the village was the force that propelled her through the icy night. Aya pulled the improvised sled, the weight of the buffalo meat dragging her back, every inch a challenge. The soft snow, which had once cushioned her steps, now seemed to drain her energy, trapping her with every movement. The wind, her constant enemy, whipped her face, turning frozen tears into tiny blades of ice. Her lungs burned, the icy air cutting her throat with each ragged breath. She felt the muscles in her legs and back scream in protest, a dull ache that threatened to paralyze her. But the image of the girl, pale and hungry, was a fire that burned in her chest, stronger than the most intense cold. "I can't stop," she whispered to herself, her voice hoarse and almost inaudible. "They need me." The howl of the wolves, now closer, echoed in the darkness, a sinister chorus that quickened her heart. She knew the carcass left behind was a temporary distraction. If she delayed too long, the pack would come after her, attracted by the scent of fresh blood that spread through the air. The urgency was palpable, an invisible whip that spurred her onward. She stumbled, almost falling into the snow, but managed to regain her balance, her knees trembling. Boris's spear, which she had put away, now seemed an added weight, though it was her only defense. She looked at the sky, searching for stars, but only dark, menacing clouds covered the vastness. The night seemed endless, and hope, a tenuous thread, threatened to snap. Meanwhile, in Aya's village, the cold was a deadly embrace. The bonfires, once robust, were now mere embers, unable to warm the frozen hearts. Kyle, one of the young hunters, sat near one of them, his gaze lost in the dying flames. He hadn't been able to sleep, tormented by the image of Aya leaving alone, an elderly widow defying the impossible. Shame gnawed at him. He and the other young men, strong and capable, had surrendered to despair, while an elderly woman wielded the spear they had abandoned. Suddenly, Kyle felt a different kind of shiver, not from cold, but from a strange emotion, a mix of guilt and a small, almost imperceptible spark of determination. He remembered his grandmother's words. True strength lies not in muscles, but in a heart that refuses to give up. Aya had not given up. She had left to save them all. How could he stay there, inert, while she fought? His eyes, once dull, gained a sparkle. He stood up, the decision taking shape in his mind. The other young men, huddled in their blankets, barely noticed his movement. Kyle picked up his own spear, which lay leaning against the tent wall, and a pair of snow skis. He didn't know exactly where Aya had gone, but he knew the general direction. He felt ridiculous, a hunter who didn't hunt, now going out to help an elder. But shame transformed into a new kind of courage. He had to try. He had to show her and himself that hope still existed in the village. He opened the tent flap, the icy wind invading the small space, and stepped out into the dark night, following the faint tracks Aya had left in the snow. He didn't know what he would find, but the idea of leaving her alone with that burden was unbearable. The village needed more than just meat. It needed a sign, an example, and Aya, in her silent stubbornness, was setting that example. Kyle, with every step on the snow, felt the weight of inertia dissipate, replaced by an urgency he hadn't felt in a long time. Kyle, with every step on the snow, felt the weight of inertia dissipate, replaced by an urgency he hadn't felt in a long time. The wind howled, mocking his inexperience in the darkness, but he gripped his father's spear, a familiar object that brought unexpected comfort. His eyes scanned the ground, searching for the faint marks that Aya, despite her burden, might have left. The trail was almost invisible, covered by the wind-blown snow, but Kyle refused to give up. He remembered the tracking lessons that Boris, Aya's husband, had taught him as a child. Snow hides, but it doesn't erase, Kyle. Look for what the wind doesn't carry away, for how the moonlight plays with the shadows. Boris's voice, deep and patient, echoed in his mind, a guide in the icy vastness. He walked, his skis gliding with a steady rhythm, a soft sound lost in the wind's chorus. With every meter, the shame of his previous inaction diminished, replaced by a fierce determination that warmed his chest. He was not Aya, he didn't have her wisdom or her experience, but he had his youth and his strength. And above all, he had the will to make a difference, to prove to himself and the village that hope had not frozen. The howl of the wolves, which had once frightened him, now seemed an icy reminder of the urgency of his mission. They were out there, hungry, and Aya was alone, a small figure against the fury of nature. Meanwhile, Aya continued her agonizing march. Each step was a battle against gravity, against the cold that infiltrated her bones, against the exhaustion that clouded her mind. The improvised sled, though effective, was an anchor that pulled her back, threatening to tear at her numb shoulders. She felt the sweat freeze on her back, turning into an icy armor, the dry, biting air burning her nostrils with each shallow breath. Her lips were chapped and bleeding, her throat dry, but she didn't dare stop to drink the icy water she carried, fearing that the cold would overcome her if she lost her rhythm. The image of the hungry girl, with her large, hopeful eyes, was the only fuel that kept her moving. Her eyes, accustomed to the darkness, desperately searched for any point of reference, any star that could guide her back home. But the sky was covered, a grey, impenetrable blanket that seemed to swallow all light. She felt like a tiny ant dragging a mountain, lost in the white immensity. With each wolf howl she heard, a more intense shiver ran down her spine. She knew they were approaching, and the carcass she had left behind wouldn't keep them occupied for long. Hope, once a vibrant flame, now flickered like a candle about to go out. Suddenly, Kyle stopped, his muscles tense. A fresher, deeper track had appeared in the snow. It wasn't just a footprint, but a wide, heavy furrow, as if something colossal had been dragged. Cale's heart leaped, a mix of relief and dread. It was her. He knelt, touching the snow with his fingertips, feeling the texture of the freshly disturbed ice, the depth of the drag mark. There was also a faint, but unmistakable, scent of blood and fresh meat carried by gusts of wind. Aya was close, very close. He stood up, his urgency renewed, and quickened his pace, following the trail with new energy, almost running. The darkness was still profound, but now there was a focus, a clear purpose that illuminated his path. Aya, in turn, felt a pang in her chest. It wasn't physical pain, but a premonition that made her stop abruptly. She pulled the sled with a last effort, her body protesting, and turned her head, sweeping the horizon with her tired eyes. The wind seemed to carry a different sound, not just the howl of wolves, but something more subtle, a creak of skis on the snow, a human sound. She frowned, trying to decipher the sound. Was her mind playing tricks on her? Exhausted and on the verge of collapse? Was it a different, more cunning predator approaching stealthily? Or could it be? The sound repeated, closer this time, and Aya felt a shiver run through her body, not just from cold. She wasn't alone. But who? And with what intention on such a cruel night? She gripped Boris's spear, her only weapon and her last hope, her heart pounding in her chest, an erratic rhythm of fear and a strange expectation. Exhaustion and cold had made her vulnerable, but the wisdom of generations warned her of imminent danger. She braced herself, her eyes fixed in the direction of the sound, while Kyle, his heart filled with a mixture of relief and apprehension, approached. The silhouette of the elder and her colossal burden finally visible in the darkness of the night. The encounter was imminent, and with it a new phase of the journey, a new challenge, and perhaps a new hope. Aya, with Boris's spear firmly gripped, watched the darkness, her heart beating an erratic rhythm of fear and expectation. The sound of skis became clear, and then a slender silhouette emerged from the gloom. Kyle. A sigh of relief escaped her chapped lips, mingling with the vapor in the icy air. The spear, once her only defense, now seemed merely a weight. Her eyes fixed on the young hunter, and she saw the apprehension and firm determination on his face. Kale, seeing Aya, stopped abruptly. The sight of her, small and bent under the colossal weight of the meat, with the spear raised, was a punch to the gut. The relief of having found her mingled with an overwhelming wave of shame. She was there, exhausted but victorious, dragging the village's salvation, while he, a young man, had delayed so long. His eyes met hers, and Kyle felt the weight of her silent judgment, but also a spark of understanding. He lowered his head for an instant, a gesture of respect and regret, before raising it, his determination now stronger. "Aya!" Kyle's voice, hoarse from the cold and emotion, broke the silence. He slid his skis towards her. I came to help." His eyes swept over the mountain of meat on the buffalo hide and then returned to the elder's weathered and tired face. Aya's wrinkles seemed deeper under the faint moonlight that tried to break through the clouds, and her lips were blue. Aya merely nodded, an almost imperceptible movement. Words seemed almost unnecessary, but her eyes, once filled with icy vigilance, softened, a glimmer of gratitude and recognition passing through them. She felt a pang of pride for the young man who had finally found his courage, and an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. The human connection, so vital and rare in those desolate lands, was a true balm for her wounded soul. "Take the other straps," Aya whispered, pointing to the leather thongs. "Let's go together." Kyle didn't wait a second. He knelt, unfastening the straps and passing them over his own shoulders. The weight, even divided, was immense. But Aya's presence beside him, Her palpable resilience infused him with renewed strength. He felt the cold, the exhaustion, but also the flame of hope she had rekindled. Together, they were more than the sum of their parts. The village needed them. With a synchronized effort, they leaned forward, pulling the improvised sled. The colossal meat began to move, sliding through the snow with a soft creak. Each step was still a battle, but now there was a rhythm, a shared cadence. Kyle looked at Aya, who kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, her unwavering determination. He felt a deep admiration for that woman, who had defied nature and the despair of her people. The wolves' howls seemed more distant now. Perhaps Kale's presence made them seem less threatening. The darkness of the night was still dense, but hope, once a tenuous thread, was now a strong rope, woven by the union of two souls. They walked, side by side, dragging the promise of life through the icy wilderness, each step proof that human connection and overcoming adversity could warm the harshest winter. The journey back was still long, but no longer solitary. Aya and Kale advanced, the sled creaking in the snow under the monumental weight of the meat. Each step was a synchronized effort, their bodies leaning forward, the leather straps cutting into their shoulders. Aya's solitude had been replaced by a silent and powerful union, a deep relief. Despite the biting cold, an inner flame, fueled by Kyle's presence, warmed her spirit. She watched the young man, his eyes fixed on the path, determination etched on his face. He was no longer the disheartened Kyle, but a hunter in the making, answering his people's call. Kyle felt his body protest with every pull, but his previous shame had transformed into a driving force. He looked at Aya, her small figure ahead, and felt a deep admiration. She was the personification of resilience, living proof that age could hide an unwavering strength. The scent of blood and snow, once a reminder of danger, was now the aroma of hope. He remembered Boris. The greatest hunt is not the one you bring down, but the one you bring home. Now he understood his true purpose. The icy night enveloped them, but the clouds began to disperse, revealing a sky sprinkled with stars. The moon, almost full, cast a silvery light over the landscape, transforming the icy wilderness into a shimmering sea. This light, faint but constant, was a guide, a promise of the sun's return and of life. The wolves' howls, though present, seemed more distant, their echoes lost in the vastness, as if nature itself recognized the strength of that union. In the village, despair still lingered, but Kyle's absence had ignited a spark of curiosity. The other young hunters, who had witnessed his departure, whispered. "Where did he go?" asked one. "Did he follow Aya?" another inquired. The idea of someone joining the elder was almost unbelievable, but hope, however faint, was a balm. Old Irina, by the bonfire, felt a shiver. She had seen the glint in Kyle's eyes. "The ancestral spirits are with them," she murmured, her words carrying wisdom that made some young people think. Aya and Kyle continued their march, each step an act of faith. With every kilometer, the village seemed closer, not only in distance, but in renewed hope. The buffalo meat, once an insurmountable mountain, was now a shared burden, a link that united them. Aya felt the exhaustion, but the vision of the village was a beacon that propelled her. She imagined the girl's face, the relief of her people. Kyle, by her side, felt the same, the promise of a future driving him. They did not speak. Words were unnecessary. The rhythm of their steps, the synchronicity of their efforts, their shared breath, all spoke of mutual understanding. Boris's spear was a symbol of a legacy. The winter was harsh, but the warmth of human connection and rekindled hope was more powerful than any cold. The journey was long, but with each step, they wove the story of a people who refused to give up, who found strength in unity and the deep wisdom of their ancestors. Aya and Kyle, shoulder to shoulder, transformed the colossal burden into an almost hypnotic rhythm. The creak of the sled and the muffled sound of their skis on the snow became the soundtrack of their resilience. Although Aya's body screamed in every muscle, Kale's presence was a balm against pain and loneliness. She felt his youth and strength flowing beside her. Her eyes, once fixed on the darkness, now occasionally drifted to Kale, a faint smile curving her chapped lips. He, in turn, watched the elder with reverence. The shame of his inaction had been replaced by deep respect and determination. The night, once an impenetrable veil, began to yield. Clouds parted, revealing a firmament studded with brilliant stars. The moon, higher and fuller, bathed the landscape in silvery, ethereal light, transforming the icy plains into a shimmering scene of hope. The wolves' howls, though present, seemed more distant, their echoes lost in the vastness. It was a silent reminder that even in the most adverse conditions, hope could find a way to shine. In Aya's village, the flame of curiosity and hope began to spread, dissipating the fog of despair. The young hunters, once huddled, now gathered, their whispers charged with new energy. "Did he really go after her?" asked one. "Will they make it?" another inquired, his voice full of hope. Kale's courage was a shock but also a catalyst. Old Irina by the bonfire watched them with a wise smile. "Aya and Kale are like the two halves of a river," she murmured. "Together they can move mountains of ice." Irina's words resonated deeply, transforming shame into a burning desire for action. They remembered the stories of their ancestors, of how the village had always overcome brutal winters through unity and sacrifice. The image of Aya, elderly and solitary, reflected their inertia. But Kale's departure was an irresistible invitation to responsibility. Tumen, one of the most disheartened, stood up, his eyes shining with determination. "We cannot stand idly by," he declared. "Aya and Kyle need us. We need to show that the village is not dead." His words were a thunderclap that awakened everyone. Other young men stood up one by one, their faces illuminated by new hope. They grabbed their spears and skis. The village, once condemned, pulsed with renewed and contagious energy. Mothers and elders watched with tears of relief and pride. This was the spirit of the people, resilience passed down. They hadn't hunted the buffalo, but they could help bring the meat, offer support, rekindle the fire. It was a turning point, a rebirth of hope. Aya and Kyle felt the proximity of the village, a warmth emanating from the hearts of their people. The smell of smoke, once faint, was now clear and comforting. Kale, with a final pull, felt the sled slide more easily. He looked at Aya, whose eyes were fixed on the horizon. A small light twinkled in the darkness, like a beacon. It was the village. The sight filled their hearts with relief, exhaustion, and a deep, silent joy. They had succeeded. Aya felt a tear of gratitude freeze on her cheek. The promise of life was within reach. Kale, by her side, felt a lump in his throat, imagining the hungry faces, the pale girl. Boris's spear was a link between past and future, a symbol that wisdom and courage could conquer the cruelest winter. They quickened their pace, propelled by the sight of the village and the certainty of human connection. The winter was harsh, but hope had returned to stay. The small light, which had once twinkled like a solitary star in the icy immensity, now expanded, revealing the outline of the village tents. Aya and Kyle felt a last shiver of cold, quickly replaced by a wave of warmth that radiated from their hearts. Exhaustion still weighed on every muscle, but the sight of home was a balm, a beacon that pulled them forward with a magnetic, almost supernatural force. Kyle, his muscles trembling and his breath ragged, looked at Aya. Her eyes, once clouded by fatigue, now shone with a mixture of relief and newfound pride. He saw the elder, small and bent under the weight of the journey, but with an unwavering dignity, and knew that the story of that night would be told for generations, an echo of courage through time. At the village entrance, the commotion was palpable. Two men and the other young hunters, with their spears and skis, were already at the forefront, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of the bonfires that had been rekindled with a new and vibrant vigor. Old Irina, her wrinkled hands clutching a fur shawl, stood beside them, her tear-filled eyes fixed on the darkness that was beginning to recede. "They are coming," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion, and a murmur of hope, almost a chant, ran through the small group. Mothers held their children, pointing in the direction from which the sound of skis and the creak of the sled began to be audible, faint at first, but growing with each second, promising an end to the agony. Suddenly, the colossal silhouette of the buffalo, dragged by two diminutive figures, emerged from the gloom, an almost fantastical sight against the silvery backdrop of the snow. A stunned and reverent silence fell upon the village. No one could believe what their eyes saw. It was real, Aya and Kale and the 5,000 kilum buffalo. Incredulity gave way to a collective cry of joy and relief that echoed across the frozen plains, breaking the oppressive and deadly silence of winter with the force of 1,000 voices. Tumen was the first to move, his skis cutting through the snow with urgency. With a war cry that seemed to release all the accumulated frustration and shame, he and the other young hunters slid towards Aya and Kyle. They didn't wait for orders. The shame of their previous inaction now completely washed away by admiration and a burning desire to help. "Aya! Kyle!" they shouted, their voices filled with a raw and redemptive emotion. Aya felt her knees buckle, but the sight of the young men running towards her, their faces filled with a new flame of purpose, gave her a last and unexpected burst of energy. She released the sled straps, and Kyle did the same, their bodies yielding to exhaustion. When the young men reached them, two men and another hunter immediately bent down to pick up the heavy straps, while others helped Aya and Kale to their feet, offering physical and emotional support. "Leave it to us," Tumen said, his voice choked with gratitude and respect. "We'll take care of the rest. You did the impossible." Aya merely nodded, tears streaming down her frozen cheeks, but a genuine smile, long absent, illuminated her weathered face. Kyle, by her side, felt a warm and comforting embrace from one of the young men, a demonstration of camaraderie he never imagined he would feel again. Boris's spear, which Aya still held with residual strength, was gently taken from her hands by one of the young men, who held it with reverence, understanding its significance. The entire village moved to meet its heroes. The children, once apathetic and silent, now ran, their eyes wide with admiration and renewed hope. Mothers embraced Aya and Kyle, their voices full of gratitude and relief, their hands squeezing them as if to make sure they were real. The bonfire, now a large crackling brazier, cast dancing shadows over their faces, revealing tears of joy and smiles of hope that had long been frozen. The buffalo, once a colossal and unattainable threat, was now the promise of life, a tangible symbol that resilience and unity could overcome the cruelest of adversities. Aya, supported by Irina and other women, felt the warmth of the community envelop her, a collective embrace that healed the invisible wounds of the soul. She looked at Kale, who was surrounded by the other young men, his eyes shining with newfound self-confidence and a sense of purpose. That moment was more than the arrival of food. It was the rebirth of a spirit, undeniable proof that ancestral wisdom, individual courage, and the unbreakable strength of human connection were the true treasures of the Yakutian village. The winter was still harsh, but the cold could no longer freeze the hope that now pulsed vibrantly in every heart. Aya's village, once on the verge of collapse, had found its redemption, a new dawn amidst the longest night. The entire village vibrated with an energy that hadn't been felt in a long time. The bonfires, once dying, now crackled with strength, casting a welcome warmth and a golden glow over faces marked by cold and hunger. The mountain of buffalo meat, now fully within the village perimeter, was the center of all attention. The young hunters, led by Tumen, worked with an urgency and efficiency that surprised even themselves. Their hands, once hesitant, now moved with purpose, loosening the ties, preparing the tools for butchering. The scent of blood and fresh meat, mingled with that of smoke, was a perfume of life. Aya, supported by Irina and other women, was led to the main bonfire. Her knees still trembled, but the extreme exhaustion began to give way to a sense of deep peace. Irina, with a smile that illuminated her entire wrinkled face, offered her a mug of hot tea made from dried herbs and melted snow. Aya held the mug with both hands, feeling the warmth spread through her frozen fingers, and drank slowly, the warm liquid flowing down her dry throat like a balm. Her eyes, once fixed on the meat, now watched the village's commotion, every gesture, every smile, every tear of relief. She saw the children, once pale and silent, now running and pointing at the buffalo, their eyes wide with a mixture of admiration and childlike curiosity. Kyle, in turn, was surrounded by the other young men. They hugged him, clapped him on the back, their voices full of a camaraderie he had never experienced. The shame that had consumed him had disappeared, replaced by a sense of belonging and genuine pride. He felt the warmth of the bonfire on his face and the warmth of acceptance in his heart. Tumen, with a glint in his eyes, handed him Boris's spear. "You brought it back, Kyle," he said, his voice hoarse. "You brought hope." Kyle held the spear, feeling the weight of the wood and the history it carried. His eyes met Aya's, and he saw a silent nod, an approval that was worth more than 1,000 words. The buffalo meat was distributed with care and reverence. Each family received its share, and the sound of knives cutting meat and the crackling of fat in the bonfire filled the air. The first hearty meal in weeks was a moment of sacred communion. People ate slowly, savoring each piece, their eyes filled with tears of gratitude. Hunger, the invisible enemy that haunted them, had finally been defeated. Aya watched everything, a soft smile playing on her lips. She had kept her promise. She had not only satisfied her people's hunger, but had rekindled something much deeper. The flame of hope, the belief in resilience, and the strength of unity. Aya's village, once on the verge of collapse, had found its redemption. The winter was still harsh, but the cold could no longer freeze the hope that now pulsed vibrantly in every heart. Boris's ancestral wisdom, Aya's courage, and the renewed determination of the young hunters had intertwined, weaving a new story for the Yakutian people, a story of overcoming and rebirth. They knew that other winters would come, other adversities, but the lesson of that icy night would be a beacon, an eternal reminder that, together, they could move mountains. The days that followed the buffalo's arrival were a balm for the soul of Aya's village. Hunger, which had once whispered threats in the darkest corners of the tents, was silenced by the intoxicating aroma of roasted meat. The bonfires, fed with renewed vigor, burned incessantly, not only for cooking, but to warm bodies and spirits. The crackling of wood and the hum of voices replaced the oppressive silence of despair. Aya, though exhausted, felt a deep peace that had long eluded her. She spent her days near the main bonfire, watching life return to the village. The wrinkles on her face seemed to soften with the smiles that now adorned it. The children, once lethargic, played in the snow, their laughter echoing like bells of hope. The pale girl, whom Aya had imagined, now ran with renewed energy, her eyes shining as she savored the meat. Irina, sitting beside Aya, held her wrinkled hand, her eyes moist with gratitude. "You brought more than food, Aya," the old woman whispered. "You brought us back to ourselves." Aya merely squeezed Irina's hand in response, a silent understanding passing between them. Kyle had transformed. The shame of his inaction had completely dissipated, replaced by a sense of purpose and leadership. He worked tirelessly with Tumen and the other young hunters, teaching them the art of skinning and preserving meat, sharing the wisdom that Aya had demonstrated. His eyes, once somber, now radiated confidence. He became a mentor, a living example that courage could be found even in the most hesitant hearts. The young men, inspired by Aya and Kael, were no longer the same. They planned future hunts, not with the arrogance of youth, but with the humility and respect for nature they had learned. Boris's spear, carefully cleaned and sharpened, was hung in Kael's tent, a symbol of a legacy he was now ready to carry and honor. The nights were filled with stories, no longer of despair, but of resilience. The story of Aya, the elderly widow who defied beasts and winter, became a living legend, told and retold, inspiring everyone. The women of the village, once huddled in their tents, now gathered to sew new clothes with the buffalo hide, their voices mingling in ancient songs that celebrated life and unity. The winter was still harsh, and the icy winds still howled across the plains, but Aya's village was stronger than ever. The cold could no longer freeze the hope that pulsed vibrantly in every heart. Aya, looking at the starry sky on a clear night, felt Boris's presence beside her. He would be proud. She had not only ensured the physical survival of her people, but had rekindled the flame of their soul, proving that ancestral wisdom, individual courage, and the unbreakable strength of human connection were the true treasures of the Yakutian village. The lesson of that icy night would be a beacon, an eternal reminder that together they could move mountains of ice, overcome any adversity, and weave a new and glorious story of resilience. The future of Aya's village, once uncertain, now shone with the promise of a new dawn, a testament to the indomitable spirit of the Yakutian people. The future of Aya's village, once uncertain, now shone with the promise of a new dawn, a testament to the indomitable spirit of the Yakutian people. Weeks turned into months, and winter, though stubborn, began to recede slowly, not just with the arrival of spring, but with the willpower that Aya had rekindled. The village not only survived, it flourished, driven by a renewed energy that permeated every tent, every heart. Aya, the elderly widow, became the silent pillar of the community. She sought no praise, but her eyes watched with serene satisfaction the rebirth around her. Sitting by the bonfire, her wrinkled hands, once firm on the spear, now wove baskets and mended furs, each movement an act of wisdom and patience. The children, who once saw her as a distant figure, now nestled at her feet, listening to the stories of their ancestors and, of course, of how she, a small elderly woman, had brought down the colossal beast. The pale girl, now robust and full of life, often brought her wild berries she found beneath the melting snow, a gesture of gratitude that warmed Aya's heart more than any bonfire. Kyle, in turn, had become the leader the village needed. His voice, once hesitant, now carried the authority of experience and respect. He and Tumen, who had become his right-hand man, organized hunts with a strategy that combined the boldness of youth with the prudence of ancestral wisdom. They hunted not out of desperation, but with a renewed purpose, honoring the life they took and ensuring the village's subsistence. Boris's spear, now a sacred artifact, was carried on every expedition, not to be used by Kyle, but as a tangible reminder of the courage and legacy that guided them. With each successful return, Kale sought Aya's gaze, and the elder's smile of approval was his greatest reward. Old Irina, with her unwavering wisdom, continued to be the guardian of traditions. She saw in Aya and Kale the personification of the Yakutian spirit, the strength of experience and the vigor of youth, united by a greater purpose. "Winter taught us that we are stronger together," she told the young people, her words echoing the truth the village had rediscovered. Aya showed us that hope never freezes, even at 71 Schuldergrass. The human connection, once fragmented by hunger and fear, had solidified into an unbreakable bond. Families gathered, sharing not only food, but laughter and dreams. Women worked together, their voices in harmony, while men prepared hides and tools, their gestures filled with a mutual respect that had once been lacking. Aya's village was no longer a cluster of isolated tents, but an extended family, united by an experience that had tested and strengthened them. The story of Aya, the widow who defied the impossible, transcended the village borders. Travelers and hunters from other Yakutian communities, attracted by rumors of her feat, came to hear the legend, to witness the resilience of a people who refused to be broken by winter. They found not only a story of bravery, but a living example of how faith, wisdom, and unity could transform despair into triumph. Aya, in her moments of solitude under the vast starry sky, felt Boris's presence stronger than ever. It was not a pain of loss, but a sense of continuity, of a legacy she had not only maintained but expanded. His spear, now a symbol for the entire village, was proof that love, courage, and ancestral wisdom were the true weapons against any adversity. Winter would return, with its biting winds and brutal temperatures, but Aya's village was ready. They had learned that true strength lay not in brute force, but in the unbreakable connection of their hearts, in the flame of hope that Aya had ignited and that now burned eternally, a beacon of resilience in the icy wilderness of Yakutia. Aya's story was not just the story of a woman, it was the story of a people, an eternal testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity.